This episode was originally recorded in March 2023. You are listening to Pharmacy, IT, and Me, your informatics pharmacist podcast. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Pharmacy, IT, and Me. My name is Tony Dow, and on this episode, I'm very excited to speak with our special guest, Dr. Sharmeen Roy from DoseMe Solutions, and she's the Senior Director of Pharmacy Solutions. So Sharmeen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tony. Thank you for having me. I've listened to your podcast and some of my friends have been on it, so I'm excited to have this opportunity.
Yeah. And actually, I was connected to you through Beju Shah. So it's really cool. Like I've seen your history of working at multiple companies and, where you are today at DoseMeRx. And I'm really excited to be speaking with you today to kind of like learn more about, your career journey and what you guys are doing over at DoseMeRx today. So, just before we get started to talking about that, can you share with the listeners a little bit more about yourself, like, just your early career path?
Sure. You're going to make me go really far back. I'm dating myself, but I went to school at University of Illinois in Chicago. That's where I graduated. After graduating, funny enough, I thought about which path to take as far as residency goes. And I had a great experience in pediatrics, and that drove me to sort of, apply for some residency in pediatrics. I went on to do a pediatric residency at Texas Children's Hospital down in Houston, Texas. And after the residency, I still wasn't sure, which direction I was going to go. I think people think that after your residency, you kind of have a set path. I like to kind of take non-traditional paths. So I actually stayed on longer at Texas Children's Hospital and worked on some clinical program development, was involved with, I would say, some projects that involved technology. It was at the time not called informatics, but it would be now referred to as an informatics project. That was kind of my first exposure during residency and right after to informatics, working on a pilot for barcode medication administration, which we were sort of a partner for the company that we had our pharmacy system from. So that was kind of a fun project to work on. I learned quite a bit, and I can say that experience has stayed through my career because, pharmacists now need to be really savvy with IT and really need to be able to have that always in the background, given different EHRs that, we interact with. I stayed there for some time, and then I'm originally from Chicago, so I relocated back to Chicago and joined University of Chicago Medical Center, went back to more direct patient care as a clinical pharmacy specialist in pediatric critical care. That was my sort of area of expertise. However, at the time, we didn't have, a big team of clinical pharmacists in peds. So built that program out, including a residency. And, we went through several EHR conversions there as well. So the experience during residency really did help me out. After University of Chicago, both my husband and I, we were ready for a change to move to somewhere warmer. So we relocated down to South Florida. So in the Sunshine State here. And during that time, I joined a company called Pipeline RX, and they are a telepharmacy company. So, at the time, I wasn't really sure what telepharmacy was and learned quickly what it was. And it was really interesting to use technology to kind of increase the reach, of pharmacists to rural areas of critical access hospitals that may not normally have access to a pharmacist 24/7. So that was a very interesting experience, and I continued and stayed with them for quite some time in various different roles. And then from there, I kind of transitioned. I would say I always wanted to stay in touch with my clinical side. So I continued to kind of, work PRN, I would say, at the Children's Hospital, then joined them to help support their clinical research program. And from there, I actually transitioned made a brave move to oncology and oncology clinical research unit at Miami Cancer Institute and worked in the clinical trials unit there prior to joining DoseMe. So kind of a long-winded, non-traditional path, but, as we're talking about, IT and pharmacy, it's always been sort of a running theme behind every position I've held.
Yeah, you did mention a lot of different like roles and positions you went through, and it's interesting to kind of see like how different they are. Like you did residency, right? And then
Yeah.
after residency, you had that project for BCMA. And then like I guess like when you were doing your residency, did you kind of already see like how technology was going to be something to be taken advantage of, before you did your BCMA thing? Was that something that was already on your mind? Like, I guess like, was that a project that someone asked you to do or something that you kind of saw and wanted to do?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually, as you know, for residents, you always have to have a longitudinal project for the year to complete, and you have the whole year to complete it. So I was involved with increasing clinical intervention documentation in our pharmacy system. So and I didn't share this earlier, but during our residency, we were going through, and now I'm really going to date me because we were going through a change from paper to electronic. So with that, we needed to have a good way of documenting, clinical interventions that pharmacists are making. It's funny, all this time has passed by, but that's still kind of an area that we're constantly working on and evolving. So that was my residency project, and working on different, coming up with the different categories or classifications, if you want to call it that, of intervention documentation, setting it up in our new pharmacy system, and also kind of monitoring the use and hoping to make it easy so the documentation, numbers would increase. Because if you make it too difficult, then the pharmacists, tend to not document as much as they should. So that was actually my project during the residency, which is how I sort of got involved with our pharmacy information system. And so when I stayed on, our director of pharmacy, asked if that's the pilot project would be something that, I can take on. And so that's how I got involved.
I see. I see. Yeah. It's funny you say that, you're talking about how long ago it was that you're converting that intervention system from, paper to electronic. I can tell you that in my experience, even the last few years here, I recently came upon an organization that just only recently switched over to electronic interventions. So it's even interesting now to hear it's not fully switched over everywhere, because everyone's at like, a different stage in their implementation, just depending on what they're prioritizing.
Yeah. And, I think I think my time at Pipeline, as telepharmacy, you're covering so many different institutions. I think that's when you really realize how you get out of your bubble, right? So I was in a large academic center. Many people tend to lose sight of that, how hospitals of various sizes function and what the priorities are. So it's interesting you say that, because even now in my current role, I see a lot of, I guess, processes or protocols that you would expect everybody to have adopted, but they're still in that transition process. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I used to work for a government hospital, and now I'm at a nonprofit, and the operations are so different and priorities are so different. It's just so weird to see kind of like, me with my limited experience of just maybe 3 major hospitals I've been at, and just seeing like how one hospital is so advanced compared to the last hospital, and yet on other aspects of that same hospital, it's so behind. And
Yeah.
it blows my mind kind of like seeing that, because I'm like, how can you be so advanced in this section, but then you're still on paper for this whole other section,
Yeah. I mean, oncology is a great example of that, right? Because it's so difficult to implement that oftentimes it's easier to keep on paper. I've heard that quite a bit. Even in our clinical trials, area, it was always a debate, should we just kind of keep it paper for the research patients? And so, yeah, it's always interesting how you select, what project is going to move forward and how you identify those priorities.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I work with oncology EHR, so I understand what you mean by that. We still have like a mix of paper and electronics. So, and then, the other thing I did notice too, when you're talking about your experience is, even though you've worked for, Pipeline, you worked for DoseMeRx, but you still had a lot of the clinical pharmacist specialist side, working with the staff, working on the clinical side. Like, what is your thoughts on like how important that is in terms of like that contributing to how you can do your technology job,
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. I mean, that it's a foundation. So it's similar to, I'll use the analogy my mentor used to tell me when I was training at the residency, where, everybody always wants to, kind of move to the clinical pharmacy specialist role. And she would always tell me that, if you can't do your clinical pharmacy tasks or fulfill that role if the patient doesn't get the medication. So you always have to understand and be able to run a pharmacy, work in a pharmacy, and dispense those doses. Because if that doesn't happen, then you can't do your job as a clinician. So, if you take that back to any other position I've held, or, even for working in sort of healthcare to technology, if you don't understand the needs of the clinician, you'll never be able to really solve the problem, right? So I think, and that's the challenge many, digital healthcare tech companies kind of face. And I think they're realizing now, and including more and more pharmacists or clinicians sort of from the beginning rather than an afterthought, that you need to have that foundational knowledge and understanding in order to speak to the clinician and show them really how your technology will solve that problem.
Awesome. So that kind of goes into your role today at DoseMeRx as a senior director of pharmacy solutions. Can you kind of just describe a little bit about what DoseMeRx is?
Sure. So DoseMeRx, it's the best way to describe it. It's a precision dosing platform that's enabled by Bayesian dosing methods. So, we utilize population pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic models, and our platform is clinician facing. So the clinicians can at the bedside use it, whether it's in their EHR or, through the web, and precisely dose patients using the Bayesian population models. And what it does is over time, as you input more data from the patients or laboratory data, administration data, it individualizes the dose and makes those predictions more precise.
So in your role as a senior director, like what's your day-to-day like working at DoseMeRx? Like what are your responsibilities?
So I kind of wear a lot of hats, I would say. In DoseMe, I oversee sort of our support of our clinicians or customers. I would say most of them are pharmacists, and provide that ongoing support. So I oversee, onboarding and implementation, as well as, post-implementation support. We have a lot of clinicians that are online at any given day, any given hour. So if they are facing any challenges, not just from a technical perspective, but, have questions regarding a clinical case, they can reach out to us 24/7 and they get, somebody, a live human answering that question. So I oversee that and also work as a liaison between our technical team, our product team, our science team. And I'm sort of like the liaison between the clinicians and that team to develop our product. When we have any either new models or new features that we're going to be releasing, there's a lot of testing that's involved. And the testing, I would say, is kind of two-pronged. You have to do the technical testing to make sure, that aspect is working as expected. And then there's the clinical aspect. So making sure it's going to work, from a clinician's perspective, how it's expected to work. If it, so that requires me putting in patient cases and testing out our features against that patient data. Obviously, these are, made up cases, but then I also work with our customers to sometimes, depending on the feature and how complex it is, usually work with some of our site champions, which are on the hospital side, to do some testing with me on real case scenarios to ensure that there's, no bugs, there's nothing funny is happening with the model or the dosing recommendation before we can, release it, because this is obviously going to help those clinicians make those clinical decisions. So we want to make sure that there's no, it's been tested in all scenarios.
I see. So, like you did mention like how there's some like integration with EHR systems. And I did, listen to one of the webinars that you hosted. And it sounds like it's pretty nice in that there's some pre-population of the information from the patient going into the DoseMeRx platform. So, I mean, this might be a technical question, but like what kind of like interface is there that can get that kind of thing to happen successfully?
Interface with the EHRs?
Yeah. This is pretty much a technical question. Like, do you know like what the interface is?
Yeah. So they're, I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but they're FHIR APIs. And so we're integrated with Epic, Cerner, and we are also integrated with some of the surveillance systems. So I don't know if that's answering your question.
Yeah. That was my question. I was just curious about how it's integrated. So
yeah, we work closely with those EHRs to make sure that, everything gets, this is part of the testing and onboarding process where we make sure everything's set up correctly with the integration. And there's a lot of testing that happens sort of like all three parties. So our team, the team from the EHR as well as the customer, so the hospital site before going live. And so they're all FHIR APIs that are set up.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I think one of the challenges I've seen with like when, implementing vendor solutions over to an organization is that, sometimes it does require the interface with the EHR, but then the EHR vendor is not really working alongside with it. It's kind of like, like for me, I work at a hospital, right? So it would be the responsibility of the third party solution and only the hospital side. And then, our EHR vendor is kind of like out of the loop. So that's why I was curious about like how close the EHR vendor works with you guys in terms of making this happen. And it sounds like they're pretty involved then, right?
Yeah, we have a really great working relationship with them. And, our platform can really interface with, any EHR that has those APIs set up, the interface set up. So we, although most of our customers, I would say, are just because of the sites that we have are using, Cerner, Epic, or one of the surveillance systems, we can, I know from our tech team, I've been told that we do have the ability to, integrate with any EHR that's willing to kind of work with us. And I think the FHIR interface makes it easier than what it was, I think, in the past with the HL7 interfaces.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. Yeah, I think like with FHIR, a lot of interoperability has been improved. It's still a work in progress, but it's a step forward. So it's good to hear that, you guys are already part of that, taking advantage of FHIR and integrating it that way. And like your experience in both pharmacy and technology before going to DoseMeRx, how has that kind of been contributing to, what you're able to do today, wearing these many hats and kind of being liaisons between the different clinician and technical teams?
So I think, I really kind of think back to my experience, like actually being in what would I need or what would I want if I'm taking care of a patient? Just kind of going back to being in the clinician's chair, so to speak, and make sure that what we're doing, the ideas and features or any, planning we're doing is going to solve a problem for the clinician. So, that's kind of the sort of view I take as far as any new, whenever we're kind of planning for new features. As far as, other teams, I'm the only pharmacist in the company. So I think I always am the person who's bringing in that clinician perspective to make sure that, we're not losing sight of that as we're moving forward, adding to our model and adding to the features in our platform.
Out of curiosity, how large is the DoseMeRx team?
So we are a team of 17. We're a small team, and half of our team is based in Brisbane, Australia, and the other half is in the US. So yeah, we're a small but mighty team.
Oh, that's awesome. So, like you being the only pharmacist, I think like sometimes like I know for me, when I worked at another hospital where I was the only informatics pharmacist for the entire system, I always felt a little bit kind of like, well, I don't want to be the final decision maker. Like, I need to hear some input, like, so from your end, I know that, you work with many clients and, there may be feature requests here and there. So how do you kind of triage and I guess like prioritize which kind of feature request will be the next one that the organization will move forward with,
Yeah. So that's the fun part of my job, I would say. I'm always talking to our pharmacists, our end users, and in those conversations, they'll bring up requests or, oh, it'd be really cool if, you could have this added. Can we get this? So they'll request features and, I call it their wish list and I get to take that back to our, our developers and our science and technology team and kind of say, this would set us apart. This feature could really make the workflow more seamless for the clinician. Take that back. And then, we sort of as a team work on a kind of a roadmap and identify those and work it into the release. Some asks that we get are on the simpler side versus others that are more complex, but we really do, try to stay on top of it as much as possible. And if we get a big majority of our customers or pharmacists asking for something, or if we hear the same thing over and over, then we really kind of move it up on the priority to say, this is something that we keep getting asked about. So we really need to figure out a way to, work it in the roadmap and prioritize it. And I would say our team works, fairly quickly, quicker than I've seen some other teams as I've been part of, other companies. But I think in our pharmacists that are using it can attest to it because they love getting those emails about, you've been asking for it and here it is, so to speak, the new, whether it's a new feature or functionality. So that's kind of the process we have. We obviously have an internal process of kind of having, a roadmap for our growth of the platform, but we always take in our feedback we hear from our pharmacist because that's really who's using it from day to day, and they help us kind of see what's important to them.
Yeah, speaking of feedback from the pharmacist and what's important to them, I know in your recent webinar I was listening to, there was like a mention of like how, like an example of like how DoseMeRx is very beneficial. I think they were talking about AKI studies. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you kind of describe about like a little bit more about how DoseMeRx can kind of make that whole process more efficient?
Sure. So I think you're referring to the webinar we did on our data and our analytics platform. So we, in the summer, did a soft launch of our embedded analytics platform. So it's utilizing the data in our platform to give you sort of a dashboard. This is information that traditionally, pharmacists would spend time kind of manually collating. So I think it's nice because it's real time and it's updated and ready to go when they need it. So if they're presenting to, P&T committees or antimicrobial stewardship committees, it's kind of really they can get it at a click of a button. So I think that's what you're referring to. Within that dashboard, we have different aspects of it. We have a clinical dashboard as well as a usage dashboard. Within the clinical dashboard, we have some risk thresholds that are being monitored, one of which is AKI. A large percentage of our hospitals use our platform for vancomycin AUC guided dosing. One of the risks of, vancomycin is acute kidney injury, and AUC guided dosing helps, reduce those rates. And so that's a way for the hospitals to quickly keep an eye on the trending rate. Although it's a surrogate marker, it just gives them an idea of what their AKI rates are. And speaking to a lot of our customers as we were launching that, I would say that, there's not a good way to monitor that. So our dashboard allows them to give some information so they can at least keep an eye on the AKI rate and make sure that it's, heading in the right direction.
Yeah, awesome. It was cool to kind of hear about the feedback from the different pharmacists on that webinar about like how DoseMeRx was able to kind of like make their workflows more efficient and get that data like just the right then and there and just saving all that time of manual collection. So it's cool to see that that's like one of the advantages for DoseMeRx. And then like, the other thing I want to ask is, people who are a little bit more interested in like getting into a role similar to you, where you are today. Do you have any particular advice you want to give them?
So I think I would say is just, keep an open mind, as cliche as that sounds, but really in pharmacy, and I think this is a pharmacy podcast, so I'm sure we can all agree that pharmacists are very agile and can fill a lot of roles, especially as, we're seeing a lot more growth in digital health. So, I think I personally have had a very non-traditional path to where I am today. And it's all because, I've gotten projects that I have no business working on, but I've taken it on and kind of figured it out. So don't be afraid to take on something just because you feel like you're not the right person, because you just don't know what opportunity may lie within that project. And also, what you're always going to add to that foundational knowledge and learn. So, I would say just keep learning and keep taking on any projects that come your way, because you never know where it will kind of take you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think like it's the personality of a pharmacist where most of the time they're kind of like in the background, but we have all these skill sets. We have these skill sets and we have the, that knowledge base and training as a pharmacist that we can apply to, something like the technology space. And I think like, like you said, like taking on those projects, someone will see our worth and, you never know what's going to happen. So thanks for sharing that advice. The other thing, if someone wanted to reach out to you or maybe learn more about DoseMeRx, what's the best way?
I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to contact me there. You can also go to our website, DoseMeRx.com, to learn more about our platform and company. And, I welcome any connections. I think that mentoring other pharmacists who want either the same path or kind of need to figure out their path. I always enjoy speaking to pharmacists who are kind of in that stage of their career where they're trying to figure out where to go. I've been there, and I know it's always helpful to talk to as many people as you can to try to figure out what your path is.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'll be putting that into the show notes. But, to be respectful of your time, thank you so much again for being on the podcast today, sharing your journey, sharing what you do, and sharing more about, how pharmacists can get into this kind of field.
Thank you. It was my pleasure being here, and I enjoyed talking to you.
All right. If you like our show, please share with your friends, or you can help us out by writing a review on Apple Podcasts or any of your other favorite podcasting services. You can also check us out on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and you can also reach out to me at tony@pharmacyitme.com. If you want to network, you can check out the Pharmacist Slack group at pharmacistconnect.com, which is PHARMACISTSCONNECT.com. There's different topic channels, including informatics, and I've met some great colleagues on there, and I look forward to connecting with you as well. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Pharmacy IT and Me. And remember, technology is a tool, patient care is the goal.